Sean Leslie Flynn, May 31, 1941, April 6, 1970, declared legally dead in 1984, was an American actor and freelance photojournalist best known for his coverage of the Vietnam War. Flynn was the only child of Australian-American actor Errol Flynn and his first wife, French-American actress Lily Damida. After studying briefly at Duke University, he embarked on an acting career. He retired by the mid-1960s to become a freelance photojournalist under contract to Time. In search of exceptional images, he traveled with Special Forces units and irregulars operating in remote areas. While on assignment in Cambodia in April 1970, Flynn and fellow photojournalist Dana Stone were captured by communist guerrillas. Neither man was seen or heard from again. In 1984, Flynn's mother had him declared dead in absentia. Early life. Flynn's parents separated when he was young. He was raised by his mother, Lily Damida. He graduated from the Lawrenceville School, Lawrenceville, New Jersey, in 1960. Source: Lawrenceville a la Padrita, School Yearbook. Entertainment career. Flynn first appeared in front of the cameras at the age of 15, when he appeared in an episode of his father's television show, The Errol Flynn Theatre. The episode, Strange Auction, was broadcast in the UK in 1956 and in the United States in 1957. When Errol Flynn died, he left his son $5,000 to help with his college education. Errol left his two eldest daughters $10,000 each. Flynn was studying at Duke University. Over a summer break in June 1960, he was visiting his mother in Fort Lauderdale. At the suggestion of his friend, actor George Hamilton, Flynn filmed a scene in Hamilton's picture Where the Boys Are, which was shooting in Fort Lauderdale at the time. Most of his scenes ended up on the cutting room floor, but he can still be seen in a scene walking by wearing a blue Xavier University sweatshirt. Acting. In May 1961, at the age of 20, Flynn accepted a contract with Sage Western Pictures to appear in the 1962 Il Figlio del Capitano Blood, a sequel to his father's hit film Captain Blood. He was paid $110 a week for the testing period, going up to $10,000 for 12 weeks' work in the film. As Flynn was still legally a minor, he needed his mother's permission, which was granted. The test was successful. The film was released in the United States in 1964 as The Son of Captain Blood. In 1962, George Hamilton announced that he wanted to make The Brothers, based on a story by Hamilton, starring himself and Flynn and Terry Thomas, but the film was never made. Around this time, his fiancée was Julie Payne, daughter of actors John Payne and Anne Shirley. A few years later, he was engaged to Alessandra Payne. Now, he made a few more films in Europe, including Il Segno di Zorro, 1963, released in 1964 as Duel at the Rio Grande, Vespertine and Marion Born with Jose Ferrer, 1963, released in 1964 as Stop Train 349, Agent Special of Venice, Var Venizet, Crever, 1964, sold to U.S. television syndication as Mission to Venice, and Sandoc, Il Maquis della Giungla, 1964, released in 1966 as Temple of the White Elephant. Flynn became bored with acting, and he went to Africa in late 1964 to try his hand at being a guide for safaris and big game hunting. He also spent time as a game warden in Kenya. In the latter part of 1965, he needed money, so he made two spaghetti westerns in Spain and Italy that were released in 1966, Set Magnifiche Pistole, Seven Guns for Timothy and Dos Pistolas Gemelas, co-starring the Spanish twin performers Pili and Millie. In the summer of 1966, Flynn went to Singapore to star in his eighth and final film, the French-Italian action film Cinq Gars pour Singapore, 1967, released in 1968 as Five Ashore in Singapore. Singing career. In September 1961, it was announced Flynn had signed a recording contract for a company known as High Fidelity RV Records. and had already recorded 4 songs for them. 2 came out: Stay in My Heart, BW, Secret Love. The songs were released regionally as a 45 RPM single, RV 5043. The single is now a rare collector's item. Photojournalism career. Vietnam. Flynn arrived in South Vietnam in January 1966 as a freelance photojournalist, first for the French magazine Paris Match, then for Time Life, and finally for United Press International. His photos were soon published around the world. He made a name for himself as one of a group of high-risk photojournalists, which included Dana Stone, Tim Page, Henri Hoot, John Steinbeck IV, Perry Dean Young, Nick Wheeler, Chaz Gerritsen, and others who would do anything to get the best pictures, even go into combat. In March 1966, Flynn was wounded in the knee while in the field. In April 1966 he was on patrol with some Green Berets and Nung, Tay and Do mercenaries, New Ings, when they were ambushed by the Viet Cong. Flynn was carrying an M16 rifle at the time and had to fight his way out along with the other soldiers. I thought not only me but all of us were greased. Flynn had been given the rifle by the Green Berets and been under fire with them before. In May he was the only journalist who made it into the Tin Hoi Pagoda in Da Nang. In June 1966, he left Vietnam long enough to star in his last movie. It was to be shot in Paris and Singapore based on the 1959 novel, Cinq Gars pour Singapore by Jean Bruce, and was tentatively called OSS 117 Goes to Singapore, but was released as Cinq Gars pour Singapore, 5 Ashore in Singapore. He returned to Vietnam. In November 1966 he was credited with saving an Australian platoon from being decimated by a mine by identifying the mine while photographing the troops near Vung Tau. He made a parachute jump with the 1st Brigade, 101st Airborne Division in December 1966. In February 1967 he and Hamilton went on a skiing holiday in Lebanon. Palestine. In 1967, he went to Palestine to cover the Arab-Israeli War of 1967. Return to Vietnam. He returned to Vietnam in 1968, after the Tet Offensive. In September 1968 he was working as a cameraman for CBS when he was injured slightly by grenade fragments while shooting a battle between U.S. and enemy forces 85 miles south of Da Nang. He went to Cambodia in early 1970, when news broke of North Vietnamese advances into that country. Disappearance. On April 6, 1970, Flynn and a group of journalists left Phnom Penh to attend a government-sponsored press conference in Saigon. Flynn, who was freelancing, and fellow photojournalist Dana Stone, who was on assignment for CBS News, chose to travel on motorcycles instead of the limousines that the majority of the other journalists were traveling in. The limousines had been previously used by tourists before the journalists took them over. Reporter Steve Bell, who was one of the last Westerners to see the two alive, later said that after the press conference, Flynn and Stone had got word that there was a checkpoint on Highway 1 manned by members of the Viet Cong. Eager to get a photograph of the Viet Cong, Flynn and Stone decided to set out on Highway 1 alone. Before they left, Bell snapped the last known photo taken of Flynn and Stone. 4 other journalists, 2 Frenchmen and 2 Japanese, had also been captured by the Viet Cong inside Cambodia on the same day. By June 1970, 25 journalists had been captured in Cambodia in the previous 3 weeks. 3 had been killed, some returned and others were missing. Flynn and Stone were never seen or heard from again and their bodies have never been found. Although it is known that Flynn and Stone were captured by Viet Cong guerrillas at a checkpoint on Highway 1, their true fate is unknown. Citing various government sources, it is believed that they were executed by factions of the Khmer Rouge. Flynn's mother, Lily Damida, spent an enormous amount of money searching for her son, with no success. In 1984 she had him declared legally dead. She died in 1994. In 1991, the remains of 2 men were found in Cambodia. In 2003, the Pentagon's Central Identification Lab in Hawaii confirmed by DNA testing that the remains found by Tim Page were actually of Clyde McKay, a boat hijacker, and Larry Humphrey, an Army deserter. In March 2010, a British team searching for Flynn's body uncovered the remains of a Western hostage allegedly executed by the Khmer Rouge. Test results on the human remains found at the grave site in eastern Kampong Cham Province, Cambodia were released on June 30, 2010, and were found not to be the remains of Sean Flynn. Lieutenant Col. Wayne Perry of the Joint POWMIA Accounting Command, JPAC, said there was no match between DNA from the recovered remains and DNA samples they had on file from the Flynn family. In popular culture, Dennis Hopper's character in the film Apocalypse Now is said to have been based on Flynn. The story of Flynn was recounted by The Clash in the song, Sean Flynn, from the album Combat Rock. Flynn has a prominent role in Michael Hare's book about his experiences as a war correspondent, Dispatches. Flynn was portrayed by Kevin Dillon in the 1992 British-Australian miniseries Frankie's House, based on a book by Flynn's friend and colleague, photojournalist Tim Page. In August 2008, The Hollywood Reporter announced that Mythic Films had optioned the rights to the Perry Dean Young memoir, Two of the Missing. At that time, Young was working on a screenplay with director Ralph Hamaker. In 2011, a film inspired by Sean Flynn as a photojournalist entitled The Road to Freedom was filmed on location in Cambodia by director Brendan Moriarty. Filmography: The Errol Flynn Theatre, 1956 TV series, episode, Strange Auction, Where the Boys Are, 1960, The Son of Captain Blood, 1962, Duel at the Rio Grande, 1963, Stop Train 349, 1963, Mission to Venice, 1964, Temple of the White Elephant, 1964, Seven Guns for Timothy, 1966, Sharpshooting Twin Sisters, 1966, Five Ashore in Singapore aka Singapore, Singapore, 1967, Wheel of Ashes, 1968. See also John Dawson Dewhurst List of journalists killed and missing in the Vietnam War. List of people who disappeared. Mayaga's incident. References. External links: brief memo about Flynn, with an example of his Vietnam images. Photo of Flynn, Left and Stone taken 2 hours before their disappearance in 1970. The mysterious disappearance of Sean Flynn and Dana Stone. 1963 photo report of Flynn filming Son of Captain Blood in Stars and Stripes. Sean Flynn on IMDb.